We will finish with international regime with the introduction of international organization. International organization is a more complicated and more sophisticated type of international regime when compared with international law. There must be two components for international organization. The first one is there's formal procedures, and the second is there's a membership comprising three or more states. International institution with just two states. Of course, one state we cannot say is international institution, but two states. That we call this bilateral international institutions. 雙邊國際組織 not international organization. Then international organization is a place for states to discuss important international issues and make decisions on how to deal with those issues. And also, there's a mechanism to implement the decisions. International organization, we will talk about a concept called pool sovereignty. Pool sovereignty, not poor sovereignty, but pool sovereignty. Pool sovereignty. 集體主權. What is pool sovereignty? As I mentioned in the first lecture, each state has their own sovereignty. Then, yes, states have their own sovereignty, so they are the higher decision-making bodies and the higher authority inside its own boundary. There's no supreme authority over a sovereign state. But states, when joining international organization, they will give up some parts of their sovereignty to that organization, international organization. Then when the international organization makes some decision, then all states must obey those decisions. They cannot override or say refuse to implement those decisions. Say the United Nations now decide to sanction North Korea. Then, of course, China does not want to sanction North Korea because North Korea is a friend of China. But due to the decision made by the UN Security Council, then that means United Nations. UN is United Nations. Then China have to follow this instruction, this decision made by the United Nations. So China give up some of its sovereignty to the UN in dealing with its organization and its relations with North Korea. Then international organization, the most influential international organization in the United Nations. It is the only global institution with legitimacy that's derived from universal membership. That is nearly all states on the world, except some of those all sovereign states of the world. That means all states which sovereignty is accepted the overwhelming majority of other states on the world. They are members of UN, and its functions. There's a lot of functions. There's lots of functions of UN. US it covers a lot of areas of international. The UN, its functions covers a lot of areas, including international security, economic and social development, the protection of human rights, protection of environments. Nowadays, the most important one is international hygiene, which this international hygiene, these duties, is now taken up by WHO, and of course, the decision of WHO affects peoples around the globe. Nowadays, yes, there's now the United Nations was established after the Second World War in 1945. There's 51 member states. Now it's expanded to 193 member states. Nearly all sovereign states on the world, except those which sovereignty is not widely accepted by overwhelming majority of states in the world. Like the best example, the most well-known example is Taiwan. And there are some other sovereign states like Kosovo, Forsok Yok, like so-called the East Cyprus 所謂嘅東呢個 Cyprus 就係東塞浦路斯 East Cyprus. They are independent state. They have their own government. They have a boundary. They have the internal sovereignty. But because those states are not widely recognized by the overwhelming majority of states on the world, so they are not members of United Nations. And then United Nations is member has an obligation to follow the UN Charter. According to UN Charter, UN has 4 purposes: to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, to cooperate in solving international problems and in promoting respect for human rights, and to be a center of harmonizing the actions of nations. Then, I can recall what I taught you in Lecture 1. After the First World War, it's established the first international organization with hopefully universal membership. Of course, not at the end of the day, not all sovereign states on the world join that organization, and that organization is called League of Nations, 國聯. League of Nations, the problem why League of Nations failed to prevent the outbreak of Second World War is because League of Nations lacked effective power. There's no mechanism for coordinating military and economic action against aggressive states, like Japan invade China, invade Manchuria. The League of Nations did not have any power to impose sanctions against Japan. And also, of course, League of Nations also did not have its own army. If it has its own army, then maybe Japan invade Manchuria. Then the League of Nations can send an army to force Japan to retreat from Manchuria. And on the other hand, some key states like USA and also USSR, Soviet Union, were not members of the League. So, in contrast to League of Nations, UN recognized the status of great power while simultaneously upholding the representatives of all states. In fact, learn from the lessons of League of Nations. So, United Nations, in the League of Nations, there's no veto power. We'll talk about veto power later. No veto power. Of course, there are big 4 in League of Nations. That is Japan, France, Britain, and Italy. They are called big 4, but they are not that big because these 4 countries are not that big. The most influential countries on the world in the 1920s, 1930s were USA and USSR. So League of Nations not represented interests of great power because many great powers are not members, and then United Nations, all great powers, including USA, USSR, now Russia, and China, they are members, and they have a very special status. It's called as a so-called permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. We'll talk about this later. That's United Nations Security Councils. There's a so-called P5 or called B5. That is Big 5. What is P5? Is that 5 states: USA, Britain, France, and Russia, and China. They have so-called permanent members of the Security Councils. They have a veto power, and then, in addition to these 5 states, there are 10 more non-permanent members. And these non-permanent members usually stay in the Security Council for 4 years. After 4 years, they leave and they rotate, and other 10 states join the U.S. Security Council. Then, if U.S. Security Council is decision binding, all members of the United Nations must follow the decision made by the Security Council of UN. And the decision made by the UN Security Council must be passed by a majority of 9 out of 15 members. 9 out of 15 members agreed with the decision, and then none of the P5 vetoed against the decision. Of course, one or two, or even three of the P5, or even very rarely, it has not yet happened. 5 of those P5 can say cast a vote of can be absent from voting, but they did not veto. They do not veto. And the other 10 members agree with the agreement, agree with the decision. Then this decision can still be made by the Security Council, but this has never happened. And so the Security Council, in fact, reflects the domination of big powers, such as P5. In addition, usually those permanent members, non-permanent members of Security Council, are usually important states. Usually, important states can, from time to time, get a membership as a non-permanent member and in the Security Council. Like Germany, always is a member of non-permanent member in the Security Council, and very small states like East Timor, 東帝汶, like Luxembourg, those small states rarely have a chance to get elected as the non-permanent members in the Security Council. So even the non-permanent membership still reflects the power status. So the Security Council reflects the great power status. Then, of course, this Security Council usually make decisions regarding international peace, or affects the international peace. And then, of course, initially the Security Council usually find solution, decide to use some solution to peacefully settle those disputes. Then, if those disputes cannot be settled, then peacefully, then the council will impose economic sanction or order an arms embargo, like North Korea. This state, it's built some nuclear weapons. Then it is a threat to the global peace and security. Then the U.S. Security Council made the decision to impose an economic sanction and arms embargo against North Korea. So nowadays, except a restricted number of products, no goods can be exported to North Korea, particularly high technology equipment, devices like even including smartphone, and of course, above all, some weapons cannot be exported to North Korea. And then even if even the export of oil to North Korea, the amount of oil exported to North Korea each annually is severely restricted. And then, of course, the UN Security Council, if there's a fighting, the UN Security Council will try to secure a ceasefire so that both sides can find a peaceful settlement to end the conflicts, and then the UN would set. The UN Security Council can decide to send a so-called peacekeeping mission, 維持和平部隊, to keep opposing forces apart and also maintain the truce, 停火令, to maintain the settlements, the peace settlements. And then U.S. Security Council also can authorize collective military actions, like U.S. Security Council's, not U.S., UN Security Council in 1950 make a decision to send a force to to force the North Korea to retreat from South Korea. That is, the UN Security Council decided to send a force to intervene into the North Korea war on behalf of the South Korea. And then another one is the famous one is the 1991, the Gulf War. The UN Security Council decided to send a force to intervene into the Gulf War on behalf of the Kuwait, to force the Iraqi armed force to retreat from Kuwait. Kuwait's 科威特. And then the UN Security Council can also recommend, not decide, but recommend the appointment of new General Secretary, and also on the admission of new members. And then UN's General Assembly. Usually General Assembly, that is an assembly, all states. There's no selected membership. All member states of United Nations can join the General Assembly. And the General Assembly also can make some decisions, but this is like the appointment of new General Secretary, 聯合國秘書長 General Secretary, and the decision made by the General Assembly must require a 2/3 majority. And then not all issues, but key issues. Usually, routine issues, normal issues can be settled by Security Council, but very important issues like the admission of new members, like mostly is admission of new members, or whether say establishment of new organization, UN organization and UN budget. This key issues is made by General Assembly. The General Assembly usually also makes some unimportant decision, but they're just kind of recommendation, not binding. In fact, General Assembly status is not as important as Security Council, because except a few so-called key issues, the General Assembly does not make important decision. Usually, UN important decision, particularly concerning international peace, are made by the UN Secretary. So UN Security Council, US Security Council. But the General Assembly, in fact, is decision-making arrangement fulfill the principle of upholding fair representation of all member states. That's all member states. They have equal say in the General Assembly. One member, one vote. And in fact, WHO also have a General Assembly. That's why a lot of African countries, because African countries are poor countries, Latin American countries, they form the majority of the number of states of the world. So usually China recommends some person as a General Secretary of WHO, and then because many poor countries, African countries and Latin American countries back China, so the person recommended by China, like the former one, Chen Fengfuzhen, Margaret Chan, Mrs. Margaret Chan, Dr. Margaret Chan, and this one, I don't want to call his name, because this YouTube. And then also it's recommended China, and then those African countries, Latin American countries support the recommendation of China. Then Secretary is a bureaucrat to implement, execute decision made by Security Councils. Okay, as UN on promotion of international peace. In fact, UN itself cannot actively promote peace, but it provides a mechanism for that facilitate peaceful resolution of international conflicts. That is, it provides an arena for states to find out methods to settle conflicts peacefully. If all great powers or if all states don't want peace, then UN Security Council or UN this system can do nothing. But if states want peace, then very tricky. Then UN can function well because it provides a mechanism and arena for states to find some solution to settle international conflicts peacefully. And then in the Cold War period, the function of UN was severely paralyzed by superpower rivalry because both USA and USSR, they were both so-called permanent members of Security Council, and they both held the so-called veto power. So here you see, before 1986, that is during the Cold War period, USA and USSR quite often execute the so-called veto power, the veto decision made by the UN Security Council, because some decision favorable to the capitalist stand, then the Soviet Union, of course, veto this decision. If a decision is favorable to the socialist camp, then the US reject that decision, veto that decision. Then, but after the Cold War, it sounds better. Of course, there's another problem: is the UN lack its own military capacity. Of course, there's a UN so-called peacekeeping force, but this peacekeeping force is personnel or members of this peacekeeping force come from its own member states. If member states don't send some force to execute these peacekeeping missions, then UN does not have its own army, its own armed force. But after the Cold War, because there's no more conflict between the capitalist camp and the socialist camp, so the veto power, the P5 execute the veto power less frequency as they did during the Cold War period, particularly Russia. You can recall from the statistics posed on this figure. Let's see, sharply decline. USSR's frequencies to use veto power sharply decline after the Cold War period. Well, of course, there are some very controversial issues like the UN. The best example, the most typical example is US decided to go ahead with the invasion of Iraq in 2003 without the approval of members of Security Council. So, Security Council, you can say with a lot of limitation, but this can still largely maintain the international peace and security after 1945. That is its year of establishment, because it provides a mechanism for which powers to communicate. And U.S. sanctions usually discourage states from conducting acts of aggression, because if UN sanction you, like North Korea, then no state dare to and say openly reject the implementation of UN sanctions, like North Korea. Nowadays, North Korea face the sanction from UN. That's the main reason why North Korea's economic condition is so miserable, it's so poor. It's because they face sanctions from United Nations. So also know the consequences, and nowadays states on the world seldom wage war. The main reason is because they fear that they face UN sanction, and the consequence of UN sanction, you can look to North Korea, you know the consequence. And UN is also useful in maintaining peace settlement, particularly sending some peacekeeping missions. I will talk about it in the last lecture 11. Okay, thanks for attention. And we finish international regime.